Morning.
Hello, everybody. It is Friday night. We changed to 9 p.m. on Saturday night, and I'm totally lost. It is Saturday night at 9 p.m., not 10 p.m., and this is Starfleet Tactical, and I am Chris Weave, and I have Alec Peters with me tonight. And
Hey, everyone.
For the people who just asked what the topic is for today, the answer is there isn't really a specific topic for today. It's going to be sort of a general discussion, general question and answer session. I'll explain in a few minutes exactly why I did that. The little foreshadowing is 4 separate plans for tonight's show fell apart. This is plan 5.
I'm the 5th choice in that. Yeah.
Well, originally I thought I was just going to do it by myself, and then we have an internal production chat that Alec is on, and Lissa and myself and Pat Doyle. And so I posted to the chat, "Hey, doing a show tonight," and Alec said, "I'm available." It's like, "Hey, that's great, that's great." I didn't even ask him because, to be honest, at this time yesterday I thought I was, but I decided to go ahead and do it. Because I realized that I could just do a question and answer show, and there was stuff to talk about, and I hadn't seen, I hadn't done a show in forever, and I could get out of the way the story about how my 10-day Christmas trip turned into a 36-hour trip, and all the other stuff that going along with it, and give an idea about where we're going to go. But first of all, before we do any of that, let me say 2 things. Hey, everybody, if you got questions about any of the shows we've done recently, anything else, etc., start thinking about your questions, start putting them in the chat. Lissa's in the background, and she'll sort of, think about which ones to throw up on the screen at some point when we get to that point. And the second thing is, Alec, how was your Christmas and your New Year's? You were traveling too, right?
We did. We've been planning a trip to New York for a while, and we did that. And so we left on the 23rd. It was a whirlwind, but absolutely fun 4 days in New York City at a little boutique hotel near Times Square. And on the 23rd, I actually got to visit with my best friend from elementary school, who I haven't seen in 50 years. And we had dinner with him. His name's Spencer. Bill Bianco, who's one of my best friends from high school, who was a producer on set at one of our big shoots here. I think it was last year's shoot. He came out, and I had seen him in 2015. So we had reconnected because of Prelude to Axanar. It was great. He was my first Star Trek fan, first Star Trek friend, and he donated to Prelude and contacted me, sent me an email one day. So it was awesome. And then my third friend her name is Gay Gutman, and she is in New York City. Haven't seen her in 20 years. But we've been communicating that entire time. It's ironic.
Yeah.
Occasional phone calls. Okay. And when I found out she did dog rescue, and so I've tried to help a couple of times with some transports. She works for, I think it's an Irish setter rescue. So anyway, we had a dinner, and it was basically those 3, Crystal and I, and we just had a blast. That was the first day in New York. And then the second day was New Year's Eve day, and we walked around the city. We had good weather.
New Year's Eve or Christmas Eve?
I'm sorry, Christmas Eve. Christmas Eve, December 24th. We walked around the city, went down to Strand Books, which is the biggest used bookstore in the city. Forbidden Planet, which is the classic
Yeah.
comic book and sci-fi store, which is at its third different location. It started across the street from the Strand, then moved the same side of the street as the Strand on the corner, then moved to the middle. So it's on. But anyway, that was fun. And then we and then we walked up through Union Square, and we were walking up town, and there's this amazing Italian restaurant. It's not it's eatery. It's called Italy, like
Okay.
Italy, well, like Italy, and it's amazing. It's like 20,000 square feet, and it's got little restaurants and little food bars, like a pizza bar and a pasta bar,
Okay.
and gourmet Italian food all over the place. It's insane. It's the craziest thing you've ever seen. It was awesome. We were just like blown away. So we hung out there, and actually, so that was fun. And then on December 25th, Christmas Day, we went out, and Crystal she bought tickets to a Wicked. Of course, Wicked is the big movie right now. Of course, everyone.
Yeah.
She went to a Wicked sing-along in Times Square at one of the theaters at the AMC theater in Times Square. So she's like, well, I'm going to this. Do you want to come? And I'm like, no. There are maybe 2 movies, maybe 3 that I would do a sing-along with. Wicked is not one of them. Probably West Side Story. But anyway, probably if they did, Sound of Music or, something like that, you'd
Rocky Horror and Sound of Music.
Rocky Horror, of course.
Ones,
yeah. There's a few, but Wicked isn't one of them. I'm not a Wicked fan. Nothing against it. We saw the movie last month, when it came out a couple of weeks ago. Enjoyed it. I got it. She explained, but not my thing. So she's across the street at the AMC theater with her sing along. I was across the street at the Regal Theater watching Gladiator 2.
How was Gladiator 2?
It was very good. It wasn't as good as the original, but it
would be really hard to be as good as the original.
Very good. Yeah. It was good. It was a great story. It tied in really well with the first one. And of course it's Ridley Scott, so everything's impeccable in the movie, Pablo Pascal was really good. I was really impressed. Not that he's always good, right? But in this, at first I'm like, oh, I'm always worried that Pedro's going to get a little Pedro Pascal. Pedro. He's going to get a little overexposed because he's in everything. But he was really good. It was well done. Denzel Washington's a bad guy, so that was fun. It was well done. Yeah, it was well done. So that was and then the next day, on the 26th, we went to see the matinee of Hamilton, which was, of course, I had to see Hamilton on Broadway. That's just a bucket list thing.
Yeah.
And which was amazing. One of the, of course, Lin-Manuel Miranda no longer performs in it, but one of the original guys, one of the main guys, get out of there, Pee-wee. You're such a pain in the ass. He dives through my, what are you doing? Oh, dives through my trash. And and then we went back down to Italy to eat again, and then came back up and saw Death Becomes Her, which is, of course, that's the Meryl Streep, Bruce Willis. Yeah, they made a play out of it, and so and it was kind of like typical Broadway camp, and it was fine. She enjoyed it, great. She wanted to see it, so it was overall it was And then the next day we left. So it was a great trip. So there you go. That was my Christmas vacation. And then
does that mean that you were back home by New Year's?
Oh yeah. Because we did our New Year's Eve or
you did a New Year's Axanar thing, and I didn't even think I'm kicking myself. I didn't realize until the next day. It's like, well, of course he did a New Year's show.
Yeah, you should have come on. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so here's what my trip was. So here's the trip as planned. Drive down to Alexandria, Virginia on New Year's Eve.
Okay.
Spend New Year's Day and staying with the family that adopted me during grad school for purposes of all major holidays. Scott Burr and his wife Diane, Scott's brother John, and I were grad school students together. John died shortly after graduate school, but the family adopted me for purposes of all major holidays. So I've spent more Thanksgiving and Christmases with them than I have with my own family. And so the plan was drive down Christmas Eve, hang out at their house for a couple of days. The matriarch of the family, Betty Peebles, 86 years old, was going to be there the next day. And Betty always collects strays for the holidays. And so it's always an eclectic bunch. We were only going to have like 10 people this time. So it was going to be relatively small. And then I was going to be there for a couple of days. And then I was going to drive to New Jersey, not Cherry Hill, but like the township next to Cherry Hill, to pick up my brother, actually, and a friend of his. He was staying with some friends of his up there who just moved there. We were going to go down to Atlantic City and spend the night gambling. And my brother wanted to see the ocean because, I've spent time on aircraft carriers. My brother made some comment about how he hadn't seen the ocean since my wedding. And I said, when did you see the ocean at my wedding? Well, we went to blah, blah. It's like, that's Chesapeake Bay. That doesn't count. Well, no, it's the ocean. It's like, no, it's not. I mean, technically, yes, but no. So we were going to go see the ocean. The next day, we were going to go back up to Cherry Hill and we were going to do a tour of the battleship. Right. And I can do battleship tours. I can do the docent thing on a battleship pretty much. I can't tell you how many gallons of water there are in the ship, but I can say that's spot 1, that's spot 2. Here's how the fire control system works, right? And those who have seen past episodes, I did a show where after I had been to one of the battleships and I was showing how the fire control, how you set up the computer and you have to turn all the knobs. And I mean, it's literally a wall of knobs so that you can. Yeah, it's so that you can make sure that this fire control director goes to this computer and the results get sent to those turrets. And you've got a total of 6 fire control directors, and you've got a total of 3 big turrets and 20 small turrets, and 2 different CICs with gunnery plot stuff that you can send it through. And so it is literally a wall of knobs that you set the knobs to build your network. And it's really seriously cool. So we were going to do that. Then I was going to come down to Annandale, Virginia, hang out with my buddy Sean for a couple of days. Then on New Year's Eve, I was going to go to Frederick, Maryland, have lunch with one friend, spend the night with some other friends, then go back down to Sean's so that on New Year's Day, so that I could game with some friends. And then I was going to drive back on the day after New Year's, maybe stopping in Frostburg with some other friends. So it was at least 5 different places I was going to be at any point, maybe 6. So that was the 10-day version of the trip. The actual trip was 36 hours. When I got down there, I knew that Diane and Scott hadn't been feeling well. And they weren't getting any better. And so I spent an hour talking to Diane as she was doing food prep stuff for the next day. And then Diane and Scott and their daughter go off to I think it was a business thing, like Scott's company Christmas party or something. I'm not sure exactly what it was. They came back. Diane says, I'm going to go upstairs and change. And then I'm going to come back down and do food prep. And I said, I'll hang out with you. She comes back down wearing a mask.
Oh, geez.
So she said, yeah, we took COVID tests and it took 2 minutes before the line showed up and it was bright red from the very beginning.
Oh God.
So they had COVID and it's like, okay, so my guess is we're not inviting the 86-year-old woman over.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I'm probably not going to go up and hang out with my brother's friends because she's 7 months pregnant and they have 2 kids under 4. Yeah. So I'm not going to do that. And so now I'm looking at this going the best case scenario is I spend 5 days isolating in somebody's house, 5 days, 6 days, 7 days isolating in somebody's house. And then then maybe I can make a decision that, yeah, I don't think I'm going to get it. And then I have like, the tail end of that trip, and it's like, no, I'm just going to drive back to Dayton.
Yeah.
So I was literally gone. I left at like 6:00 in the morning on New Year's or Christmas Eve. I was back by like 4:00 on Christmas Day. I unloaded my car. In fact, I don't even think it was 4. It was something like that. It was earlier than that. Unloaded my car, went to the office because I work like I am closer to the front gate at the base I work on right now than I am when I'm sitting in my cubicle. So I went to my office, grabbed my work laptop, and came home and sent a note out to everybody saying, hey, guess what? I'm not on leave. I'm going to be on leave this week, but the following week, I'm not going to be on leave. And I'm going to be working at home because I was exposed to COVID. So I'm just going to isolate for however long. And so I worked at home for a week, and then the snow hit, right? So I ended up working at home for a week and a day because of the snows. And so that's how my Christmas worked. Now I did get to start early. Everybody else heard last time that I had bought a bunch of new computer equipment before the tariffs hit. So I moved stuff around. This is a slightly different angle than previous because I moved some things around on my desk. You can't see most of it, but actually my new laptop, which I haven't finished configuring yet, I realized I got a knowledge management issue because I've got 2 laptops and I have to keep them in sync. My new laptop is like right here. So once I get that set up, if you recall, when I first started doing the show, it was a different angle. The angle was not that way. It was that way. And so we'll go back to the old angle because I'm going to start using the new laptop for the show. Probably. I could still use this one, I guess. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Right.
I guess. All right. Well, so my Christmas is way better than yours.
Yeah. To be honest, there's worse things than just having an excuse not to see anybody for a week.
I mean, yeah.
I left the house a couple of times. Like I said, I went and got the computer on Christmas Day. At one point, I picked up a pizza. At another point, I picked up some stuff. That the next week, at one point I picked up some stuff from a barbecue place. And I went to the grocery store, and that was it. Other than that, I was at home. So that actually worked out relatively well. So,
yeah, I was just looking real quick. Someone, Eric asked, "What's next after Axanar?" Hopefully, the Orville fan film. That's what's next.
That would be fantastic.
Also Hamilton. You can see Hamilton on Disney Plus. They filmed it back when Lin-Manuel Miranda was on it. They filmed it, and so you can see it. And they also have a sing-along version of that, so with words, so you can sing along with them, which is awesome, which is fun to do, actually.
That does sound good.
Does sound good. I watched that. I think I watched that on New Year's Day. Anyway, so yeah, there you go.
I was going to say, my brother Delon said that I was talking about my brother Sean, not him, as the brother I was going to go hang out with. So that's true. It was the other brother. So I have a brother Sean and I have a friend Sean, and they spell it differently, but you probably can't tell that from me saying Sean. And so I was going to go visit Sean, then go to Sean's place. So speaking of let me do the future bit a little bit real quick, and where we got here, because remember I said that there were this is plan number 5, maybe even 6 if you count the fact that I thought about canceling before I thought about doing this. So I decided I wanted to do sort of a one-off show because next week no show because I'll be at a science fiction convention. The week after that, and for the foreseeable future, I don't have anything planned that's going to get in the way of a show until the first weekend in March. So the rest of January and all of February should be good. The first weekend in March, I'll be at a science fiction convention. So we're good on that. But I wanted to do a show, and I thought, okay, so first of all, I want to do one on the comic/role-playing game Albedo. Do you know about this? Have you seen this? Okay,
No.
so a guy named Steve Galactica, he had been a technical illustrator for the United States Air Force, did this fantastic, reasonably hard science comic book back in the 80s and 90s called Albedo. And Albedo had 3 stories in it. And one of those stories was Irma Felna EDF. And I can't remember whether he did the other 2 or he just did Irma Felna. But Irma Felna EDF. And from now on, every time I say Albedo, you should think Irma Felna EDF, because that's really the part I'm talking about. And when they turned it into a role-playing game, they named it Albedo, but it's really just the Irma Felna EDF part. So EDF is the Extraplanetary Defense Force. Irma Felna is a young officer in the Extraplanetary Defense Force, and she's a fox. Literally, because it's a furry comic.
Oh, God.
Now, we've all seen the hierarchy chart about science fiction fans, et cetera. Like, you know, these fans think they're more better than these fans, et cetera, et cetera. And at the very bottom, everybody thinks they're better than furries. Okay, so I am not a furry. I am somebody that appreciates really, really high quality, well thought through, hard science fiction that's well illustrated with great ship designs. The fact that we've got that the bad guys are racist rabbits, I am willing to overlook that by virtue of all the other things that it's got going in its favor. And among other things, so there was a role-playing game that's there's 3 different editions of it, of which the second and the first are almost identical. The third edition is a little bit different. And then I just discovered that there's also a miniatures game that I had no idea even existed, that's set 80 years previously, or 60 years or 40 years previously, or something like that, at the time of the first war with the rabbits, I think. And it's got a background book that I haven't read yet. And it's like, oh, this is going to be fantastic. And one of the things about this is that there's a ship source book that talks about the modular construction techniques they use for this. So like this is so much exactly what I talk about on this show. This is going to be great. Yeah, there's a lot of it there, and it's more than one episode. And I didn't want to start a multi-part thing. I frequently do it, but I hate starting multi-part things when I can't finish them right away.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I sort of wrapped my arms around a little bit and went, oh my God, this is, yeah, I'm going to have to read it all. Now, when I say have to read it all, ow, let go of my arm. Stop twisting my arm. Don't make me read it all. But I do really kind of need to read it all to do a good job on this. So okay, so that was plan number 1. That's not going to work. I have to kick that one down the road. And then I thought, okay, the jump drive in Albedo is really interesting. There's some technical crunchy goodness in there, and superficially it shares a lot of attributes with this webcomic called Outsider. The drive is totally different background, totally unrelated to Albedo in all ways, shapes, or form. The only thing that these 2 have in common, really, is a jump drive that sort of kind of looks the same. It's like, okay, so there's like a compare and contrast opportunity here, and I can do some stuff. And I was looking through the Outsider stuff, and it's like, oh, wow. The interesting thing about this is that the designer of this webcomic has been answering questions on the forums about it for like 20 years.
Wow.
So, yeah, I mean, at least he started compiling all this stuff in like 2011 and throwing it up on the web. And so there's a lot of crunchy goodness there, including things like, and those of you who've been watching this show for a while can understand exactly the level of arousal that I hit when I read the following. Early on, they built a lot of carriers. The one side built a lot of carriers because they thought that carrier warfare was the wave of the future. They were wrong. So now all these carriers that they interpreted as being the main striking arm are all being used as sort of like static defenses. And it's like, this is fantastic. This is a situation where I can like go through the history of the war, and like at one point they lose a bunch of their capital ships, and so they have to change their strategy because they're on their back foot. They're having to do, it's like, there's a lot to do here. Yeah. Okay. So another big topic, right? So now I've picked two topics in a row that are both more reading than I have time to do. Admittedly, I could have done albedo. I could have done the reading if I'd realized how much it was going to be and started earlier. More reading than I've got time to do, and multi-part episodes. So I'm expecting 2 episodes for each, or maybe not 2 for Outsider, but it's big. It's big. So, okay, so I can't do that. So the Center for International Maritime Security had an alternate force structure week they did. They're a very interesting website. If you're into naval stuff, I recommend it. And they frequently will do theme weeks where they'll have like a different article each day on some topic. And so they did an alternate force structures week, and they packaged all that stuff together. And I thought, oh, there's got to be something in the alternate force structures that I can talk about that and sort of tie it into what I've done, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, no. It was, there really wasn't anything new there. There was like one paragraph that had something that I hadn't really thought about. And I'll tell you what it is right now. And it is one of the reasons why commerce rating wasn't as big a deal in World War II as they thought it was going to be, and even why it wasn't. It was a big deal in World War I, but commerce rating wasn't as big deal in the 20th century as they thought it would be based upon what had happened in previous times. And the answer is radio and transatlantic cables too. But the thing is that it's like, oh yeah, we got a distress signal. There's a raider over there. Why don't we go kill him? So you always knew where to send the forces to go hunt down the raiders. Whereas, like, back in the days of the Age of Sail, you had no idea where the raider was. You right. you over a period of time, you could sort of plot like, all the ships that go in this general area don't seem to make it through. Maybe he's over there somewhere. But that took time, and calling for reinforcements took weeks instead of minutes. And so that's the only thing that was in this entire SimSec thing that I sort of went like, oh, wow, yeah, that's incredibly obvious, and I never thought about that. Okay, roger that. So now you guys know. The last thing I was going to look at was, oh, now I'm having a hard time even remembering what it was. There was some other thing that I went and looked at, and I thought, well, maybe there's a there, some other article or something like that sounded really promising, and no, there wasn't any promise there. And so at that point, I'm going like, well, at this point, it's like yesterday about this time. And I'm going, maybe I should just pull the plug. All right, I'll think on it. I'll sleep on it, decide what I'm going to do. Woke up this morning and said, no, damn it, we're going to do a show. And we'll do a question and answer show. So everybody should be prepared to ask questions. So now we're ready to answer questions.
I will say also that yesterday I saw the next episode of there's a series called World War III on YouTube, and it's all like it's like a computer generated story, computer generated art. It's interesting. I follow it because there's a lot of tech in it, and they make up, and it takes place like 2032, I think. So a little bit in the future, but not so far that it's all the current tech for the most part. And it's fun. It's fun to watch. I think the first season was like 15 episodes, and the newest season just started. And it's at times you could think it's kind of amateurish, but sometimes I go, oh, that's pretty cheesy CGI. But then sometimes I go, wow, they put a lot of thought into this.
Or is it like a documentary thing, pseudo documentary?
Yeah, and it's kind of like the Third World War by Hackett or Red Storm Rising or something like that. And this season they start off this season with China taking advantage of so season 1 is all Russia invades the Balkans. And And how do we respond?
Balkans or Baltics?
The Baltics. I'm sorry, the Baltics.
Okay.
And the one thing I got out of the first season was I was like, yeah, they wrote this out before the Ukraine war because the Russians aren't this good, right? So I think they're giving the Russians a lot of credit, which they probably have to do to make the story compelling. But I've enjoyed it. You know, it's good enough to watch and enjoy, and I'm it's something we should probably watch it. We could probably do a critique of it. Watch 3 episodes and then do a critique the next week and say, okay, everyone, go watch these 3 episodes. We're going to talk about it this weekend.
Yeah, I'd have to think about that because that's awful close to the day job.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah, I can understand that.
So, I mean, I do not work for somebody that really cares about navies, which is one of the reasons why I feel like I could talk about modern navies. But when we start getting into other warfare domains, I feel like I have a lot less freedom of action in order to talk about stuff like that. Now, that having been said, on my list of things to do is I want to go back and reread Hackett. So what he's talking about, there's 2 novels. They're novels without characters, right? They're fictional nonfiction.
Yeah.
So they're fictional after the war reports on what happened during the war of a war that didn't happen. They were written in like 77 and 78, I think, if I remember correctly, something like that. Carter administration. The first one is the Third World War, August 1985. And the second one is the Third World War, The Untold Story. And so there's a little bit of revision in the second one where they said, oh, we got it wrong in the first part, but the historians have been hard at work when we figured out some stuff we didn't understand before, and they changed the scenario a little bit. So John Hackett was a general, a British general who was assigned to NATO, and he wanted to raise this clarion call about NATO's unpreparedness. And somebody said to him, like, look, if you just write it as a straight up document about how NATO's screwed, nobody's going to read it. Write a novel. And I want to say it ended up on like the New York Times bestseller list.
I think so. Yeah. I think
both did.
It was certainly I mean, the first one was certainly, that was a hit. I mean,
yeah.
We were talking about it. Yeah.
And I read them when I was like a freshman or sophomore in high school, and I was looking for airplanes blowing up and ships sinking and shit like that. And nowadays, I'm sure I'll go back and I'll read it, and like all the the political stuff will be the part that really gets me excited. At the time, it's like I could care less about that stuff, but I've got copies of them, and they're on the list to reread because they're really good. And the one thing I remember is at the end of the first one, I think, if I remember correctly, at one point the Russians have landed on British soil, and Prince Charles evacuates on a Nimrod.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. I mean, I remember that. I know that the Russians nuked Birmingham.
That actually might have been the alternate ending, right? Remember he did this. What might have happened if NATO didn't get its act together in the late 1970s and continued on the course it was continuing on? So
here, someone asked, these are the 2 books.
Yeah.
So
they did an alternate ending that was basically like, if you don't listen to me in this book and you keep screwing up, here's what's going to happen. And in that one, the NATO loses the war. The Russians take Great Britain, and Prince Charles evacuates to Canada on a British Nimrod.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. Okay,
that's the only thing I remember.
So what was Hackett just a little too pessimistic?
No. I think that what ended up happening was by the tail end of the Carter administration. Remember, in 1979, there was the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. And even, anybody who wasn't a super diehard peacenik at that point went, maybe we can't trust these guys after all. And then you had the election of Ronald Reagan, who Reagan is not one of my favorite presidents. And I always think it's worth pointing out that the final Carter suggested military budget was just as big as the Reagan budget, because Carter had sort of decided, like, on second thought, we need to beef up. So I don't think that it was that he was pessimistic. I think that, amongst other things, the book worked. I think the book worked. I mean, it spent that much time on the New York Times bestseller list. It was clearly influencing opinion because people were reading it and they were talking about it. This is the same reason why, when in my last job, I told everybody that they had to go and read Ghost Fleet by Peter Singer, and I can't remember who the other guy was. I feel bad that I can't remember who his co-author was. The book Ghost Fleet. I would tell all the youngsters in my organizations, like, look, you need to read this book. And frequently they'd say things like, yeah, I heard it's not very good. And I said, I don't care. You need to read it because there are people in the Pentagon that are reading this. Everybody in the Pentagon is reading this. And if everybody in the Pentagon is reading a book, you better read it too.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
You need to know what's in it because it is influencing hearts and minds, and you need to know about that. Now, Ghost Fleet has some issues. The biggest issue is they added in this novel, the novel's about a Chinese invasion of a war with China that involves a Chinese invasion of Hawaii. And they added this woman who's killing Chinese, this female serial killer killing Chinese soldiers subplot. And when interviewed about it, Singer says, yeah, we didn't want to do that. Our editor made us.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And it's easily the weakest part of the book. Easily the weakest part of the book. I need to go back and reread that book. The idea was that there was a supply chain attack. So basically all of our high-end stuff didn't work, and it was basically Battlestar Galactica. Watch, if you want to see, they never made a movie out of Ghost Fleet. Just watch the Battlestar Galactica miniseries. Except what ends up happening in Ghost Fleet is they go to the Ghost Fleet, which is all the ships that are in mothballs, and they pull all the ships out of mothballs. And they do things like, hey, we finally got the naval railgun working. Where can we put it? I know, we'll put it on the Zumwalt.
Yeah.
So you end up with some cool stuff like railguns on the Zumwalt.
Gotcha.
So,
Also, didn't Team Yankee come out right after Hackett?
Yeah, it was that same general time frame.
Yeah.
It was the same general time frame.
And then 10 years later, Red Storm Rising. Right?
Yeah, about that. I remember.
Red Storm Rising is like late 80s, isn't it?
Yeah, because I remember reading Red Storm Rising in November of '88.
Okay.
Flying home for Thanksgiving when I was in grad school. And I think it was November of '88. It might have been November of '89. Whichever year it was that I was reading it, there was a huge amount of snow. So I'm glad I had Red Storm Rising and I had just started it, because I almost finished the book by the time I got to Des Moines.
Wow.
I was like 100 pages from the end, because my flight leaving Washington National, my flight leaving National was delayed by like 5 hours. And then I thought, okay, this is going to be great. I'm going to get in. I had never been on a flight that had been delayed like that. I thought they would put you up in a hotel. That was silly of me to even think that. But I thought, okay, they'll put me up in a hotel. I'll be in Chicago. I can get a Giordano's pizza. This will be fantastic. I can get a Giordano's. And then I discovered they booked me for another flight. And the flight's going to get in at 2 a.m. So it's going to be the worst of all possible worlds, because I'm getting picked up by a friend of mine. One of my college roommates is supposed to pick me up, and this is before cell phones, and I got no way to know when I'm going to get in. But
everything, the storm was huge, and it had slowed down everything, screwed up everything. So I get to Chicago, and my original flight hasn't left yet. And so I do the O.J. Simpson thing through the airport. I mean, the running through the airport part, not the killing people part. So I ran through the airport and got to the boarding tube like just as they were about to close it, and said, I'd really like to be on that airplane. I'm supposed to be on that airplane, and they rebooked me. Can I get on that airplane instead? So my luggage did not make it. I had to go back to the airport the next day and get my luggage, but I made it. And as a result, instead of arriving at like 4:00 in the afternoon, I got there at like 10:00 at night, but I did get in that night and not like the next morning. And I read most of Red Storm Rising, and it turns out I had not yet met any of the people involved in this, but he talks in Red Storm Rising about how he played in the game. They did a Harpoon game to sort of game it out. I knew everybody in that game. I later met everybody in that game with the exception of Tom Clancy. I never met Clancy. But Chris Carlson was one of the folks. Chris has been on the show a bunch of times. He was like the Red Naval Commander. Larry Bond was like the Red Commander.
Wow.
Right? So, I mean, I've been to Larry's house. Todd Cowderer was one of the guys there. Todd was the late Todd Cowderer. Todd was a friend of mine. Todd once made the comment. He said, he just sort of offhandedly commented, it's like, yeah, I used to game with Tom Clancy. I think that I'm the template for Jack Ryan. And I went, that's a bold statement. Todd, what do you have to back that up? And he said, well, I'm a Naval Academy grad, and I worked at the Submarine Analysis Group at the time that Tom Clancy wrote that book. Now, when Jack Ryan worked at the Submarine Analysis Group, Jack Ryan's Submarine Analysis Group was at CIA. But in reality, the Submarine Analysis Group was at O&I.
Oh, interesting.
And Todd's father is mentioned in Blind Man's Bluff, which is a fantastic book. The subtitle is the Secret Story of American Submarine Intelligence or Submarine Espionage or something like that. They talk about tapping Soviet cables and stuff like that.
Oh,
and
wow. Okay, that's cool.
So Commander Cowderer, Todd's father, is mentioned for allegedly, and I have no idea if this was true or not, allegedly bottoming his submarine on the floor of Vladivostok Harbor for a couple of days.
Oh, wow.
But at one point, Todd Cowderer's dad was Sublant, Commander Submarine Forces Atlantic. And Todd was in the Submarine Analysis Group. So every 2 weeks, Todd and a colleague would get in a car and they drive from O&I down to Norfolk. And Todd would have a top secret, oh my God level conversation with his dad.
Oh, geez.
So at that point, I went, okay, I'm willing to spot you this one, Todd. I think you might very well have been the number. Right.
Very cool. Very cool.
But, and then there's like 2 or 3 other people that are involved in that game, and I know them too.
I assume you're talking about.
Yeah, that's Harold Coyle, who wrote Team Yankee, basically. Yeah. And so Team Yankee was not too bad. Team Yankee was pretty good. GDW did a Team Yankee game, which they used the team. I think they called it the Team Yankee system. And I think it's back in print. But they did a Korea level game, and it was a one-on-one tank game. They had earlier done Assault, which was like a couple of tanks per counter. This was a one-on-one tank game, and. GDW, it's funny because these days GDW is thought of as the guys who did Traveler. They're really thought of as the guys who did Traveler, and Traveler is the part of that's still in print, et cetera, et cetera. But GDW itself kind of viewed itself as a board game company that just happened to have this role-playing game on the side. and they did all sorts of things for the game system Assault. And at one point, I owned all of it. And they did all the Team Yankee games. There was a Arab-Israeli version. There was a 1950s version. There was Team Yankee itself, which was World War III. And there was Battlefield Europe, which was sort of looking forward to, post-Soviet collapse stuff about the time that the Soviets were collapsing. And that was the last game in that series. And Harold Coyle himself was a war gamer. I've never really had a conversation with him. I can't even remember if I've been introduced to him, but he used to show up at Origins all the time. He was pointed out to me a couple of times.
So I guess the question I have, since I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, I'll ask the question is, I still hear from time to time, and you could just be pundits talking, but talking about, the threat to Poland or the threat to, the threat to NATO. I mean, Putin. There's one channel, one of the big channels, which you probably know on YouTube, and like they got a new video every day about the Ukraine war and the Soviet Union, this and that, whatever. I find them incredibly optimistic about Ukraine. I mean, it's always calamity for Putin and Ukraine. Yes, and I always think that's not quite. I don't believe that's accurate. But then again, I don't believe it's accurate that I mean, you also hear from people. Oh well, it's going to be Ukraine's going to crumble and fall apart, and I don't quite believe that either.
So two thoughts on that.
Yeah. One
is there's a channel called China Update that I just recently discovered that the guy seems to be very, very knowledgeable, and I know a little bit about China, and my bullshit detector is not going off at all when I listen to this guy. And he's apologized the last couple of episodes because he said, look, I know the titles are kind of clickbaity. I have to do that, or the algorithm doesn't respond. But okay, so everybody, I'm going to do clickbaity titles, but I will present the same sober, realistic, non-clickbaity analysis that I always do. The titles are just going to be a little clickbaity. And it's like, yeah, that's true. I mean, like there's some sort of virus going around in China, and he lives in China, and he said, look, I went to the local hospitals. I've been treated in Chinese hospitals. It's busy, but Chinese hospitals are always busy. It's no worse than it is at any point at this time of the year. It is certainly not nearly as bad as it was during COVID. And I was in the hospital, visiting the hospital during the time of COVID. It's not as bad as that. And I've been calling around to my friends in other parts of the country, and they're telling me the same thing. So yeah, they've got it's just a regular seasonal virus thing. This isn't COVID-2 happening, right? And if that changes, I'll let you know. Okay, that's pretty, he could have gone for very clickbaity analysis, and he's not. He's very sober.
Right.
Second thing is that the person that I would point people to is Perun, Perun. And so Perun is an interesting guy. He's a defense economist. He's very funny. In fact, he even makes some jokes about how he decided to do videos on defense economics because that's where all the money is. That's the way to get good ratings, is defense economics videos on YouTube. But he started off, he had this gaming channel that he just, had very small number of subscribers, etc. And when the Ukraine war happened, he started talking about it. And because friends of his said, you should do a video on this. You're a defense analyst, do a video on this. And now the main channel is about defense economics and defense topics. And he created a separate gaming channel that he moved the gaming stuff to. And so his stuff is generally very good. He and I do not by any stretch of the imagination totally overlap in our Jeopardy categories. But in the places where we do overlap, he's got his act together. every now and then he'll say something about naval combat, and I'll go, that's close. That's a B plus answer. That isn't an A answer. That's a B plus answer. But in general, he's got his act together. And so much so that there's at least one video I watched recently that I think I may go into the office on Monday and put it into the system and claim continuous learning points for my annual training, because it's a video on how to screw up an Air Force, and it's tricks that procurement people do when they want to put their thumb on the scale. And it's fantastic. It's like, well, if you're afraid of this happening, here's how you can bias it in the direction. It's sort of like it's the defense economics equivalent of How to Lie with Statistics, if you ever saw that book, which was required reading in graduate school when I was there. So Perun, I'd recommend. He got started in Ukraine, and his basic commentary on this is the Russians have some severe issues, and the Ukrainians are doing as well as they can. But when push comes to shove, Russia is the largest country in Europe. Ukraine is like the third largest country in Europe. So Ukraine is not a small country by any stretch of the imagination. But the Russians just have so much kit just lying around, right? Which is both an advantage and a disadvantage. They don't have anything new,
right?
But they got lots of old stuff.
This is here. I'm just sharing this. This is the one it's a big channel. I got 1.3 million subscribers. And this pops up in my feed all the time. And you can just look at this.
Yeah.
Look at the, look at the videos, how Ukraine will win the war.
If I remember correctly,
a devastating blow.
And if I remember correctly, the videos are like that too.
Yeah, it's and I keep after a while I watch a couple of these videos and say, I'm sorry, why isn't the war over already?
Yeah.
North Korean battalion wiped out in Kursk. Russia's countdown to collapse begins. I mean, okay, well, how long? You've been saying that for 6 months. Ukrainian war.
The all the new AI channels that have popped up recently. Now, some of them, I will admit, I listen to a lot of I say I listen to YouTube channels because generally that's what I do. I don't watch a whole lot of YouTube. I listen to a lot of YouTube.
Right.
Because I just listen to it on my phone as I'm walking around, cleaning and stuff like that. And I listen to a lot of 40K stuff. And there's been some new AI generated stuff, some of which is good enough. And so the real problem is, it's like, if that had real editing, that 45-minute video would have been an excellent 25-minute video. But it's a little bit padded at 45 and it's kind of redundant and stuff like that. There's one I discovered recently that it's like everything in it is just garbage. It's just, it's like, I've never heard of this topic before. Let me look it up. It's like, like they clearly, it's like not related to the actual topic it talked about. Like I started listening to one today, the one that sort of finally convinced me to just like tell YouTube to stop telling me about these guys, was one on the Chambers Militant in 40K. Okay, so for those who aren't hardcore 40K people, the Chambers Militant are the parts of or what they collectively sort of refer to as parts of the Inquisition that actually go out and like take, stomp people and take names and, et cetera, et cetera. And so they're the parts that get kind of kinetic. And I listened to this thing for like 20 minutes, and at no point did they mention that they're part of the Inquisition. At no point did they mention Order Malleus or Order Xenos or Order Hereticus or any of they just don't mention it. And it's just like, it's all like superlatives and this and that, et cetera. But superlatives, but very general statements. It's like,
right.
And it's just like, it's the sort of stuff. it's the sort of stuff that you put in an essay when you don't really know what you're talking about and you're just trying to pad out your word count.
Yeah, which AI tends to do a lot.
Yeah, and some of these like there's one
Warhammer 40. Tom Spedal asked what's 40K. Warhammer 40,000. It's the Game by Games Workshop.
Yeah. So, and the very first time when Alec invited me on the show, back when the Saturday night thing was just another episode of Axanar After Dark, on a show called Axanar After Dark, we spent 90 minutes talking about 40K. Because it turns out that we were both long-term 40K fans. You date back to like 93, 94, if I remember. 98? Yeah. 98. And I date back to about 90. I can remember when Rogue Trader, when the original Rogue Trader book came out, which was a lot more tongue-in-cheek than it later became, I looked at this and went, this is dumb. And I remember the moment when I went, oh, maybe I care. Maybe I care after all. And it was reading the back of the box for the game Space Marine, the original Epic game Space Marine. I was in a Games Workshop store that just happened to be between me and campus when I was in grad school. So it's like, I'll stop by and take a look. And I'm reading the back of it, and it has the speeches that the Imperial and the heresy, the one of Horus's commanders gave to their forces before a battle. And I went, I think I need to own this game. And
it's changed a lot. And the thing about it is it's
thousands of dollars later.
Yeah, right. Yeah, the game has really changed a lot, because going back to what it was in 98, I was there when second edition was just on the way out. Third edition was just be announced. And second edition was crazy old school. Third edition was kind of like the first modern version of Warhammer 40,000. And since then it's crazy how big it's gotten.
Yeah, and it's been interesting watching all the shifts that Games Workshop has made. Like, for at one point, there was a bunch of stuff where the quality of the painting on the cover of the boxes and stuff like that, like you'd buy a box of miniatures and they'd have painted miniatures on the cover, and the quality just went to shit. That was a conscious decision on their part.
Yeah.
They made the decision to make and it wasn't that the painting was bad, it was very simplistic. That would be a better way to say it. It was very simplistic, because they were afraid that people who might otherwise be interested in the show would look at this and go, well, I could never do that.
Right. That's exactly right. Which was one of their major problems, was that whenever they would, and they do tutorials too. And it was like, step 1 is prime it. Step 2 is base it. Step 3 is first coat. Step 4, you're entering Golden Demon, which is their annual contest for the best painted miniature. Yeah. And painting's gotten more sophisticated, but it was interesting. I recently read, well, if Imperial Fist were like one of the main legions, realistically, they have pushed Dark Angels, Blood Angels, and Space Wolves and Ultramarines. Those 4 legions are the legions that they have pushed and have had codexes for.
Yeah.
But what about the Imperial Fist? The Imperial Fist were one of the Emperor's Praetorians. They were the one. Why not?
And they were in charge of the defense of Terra.
I know. And they said
they guarded the Imperial Palace. What the hell?
The reason is because it's really tough to paint yellow. I was like, oh, okay. Yeah. Because there was an Imperial Fist box set back in second edition. It was a special edition box set. And I always thought it was cool that, but the game is, we could do a whole hour on 40K, but the game has come a long way, to the point where finally I think in 2017, basically, when they came out with a new edition. They decided they were going to move the story of the game forward, because before then it had just been, it's the year 40,000 and the universe is shit, and that was it, and there was nothing. But then they decided, you know what, we're going to move the story forward to keep people interested, and that's when they brought back Reboot Gilliman. That's when the Emperor, that's when they basically said the Emperor is getting better. So there's, they've spent the past 7 years. What's that?
The destruction of Cadia and the
destruction of Cadia. Jesus Christ!
Yeah,
Cadia is the big planet that's always been guarding the Eye of Terror, which is where the Chaos Forces come out of. So they've really moved it forward. They just released Fulgrim, so now you've got 4 major Chaos Primarchs, Traitor Primarchs, which means also, well, okay, so now the next they got to be releasing Loyal Primarch, because they came out with Gilliman. Gilliman was the first Primarch that came back, who was in stasis, and he was, he got better.
If I remember correctly, there's only 2 Primarchs, 2 Loyalist Primarchs anyway, that were killed, that we know are dead.
Yes.
And one of them seems to be getting better.
No, so the 2 that are dead are Ferrus Manus, a Primarch of the Iron, not the Iron Warriors.
Yeah, Iron Hands.
Iron Hands. And Sanguinius, who died by Horus's hand at the final battle with the Emperor.
But Sanguinius keeps showing up in these weird crystal statue things.
Yeah, they keep talking about, they've talked about his clone. They've talked about, I think it would be a real stretch for them to bring him back. But anyway, for now, let's just say those are the last 2 they would ever bring back, because they're both officially dead. Are you all right, Pee-wee? And that was Pee-wee, who you can see right down there. Right there. That's Pee-wee right there. And so the question is, who will they be releasing? Who will they be bringing back? And they've brought back Gilliman, which you knew was kind of, you always knew it was going to be Gilliman, because he was the one that was in stasis.
Yeah. So there were 2 that we actually knew where they were, and they brought them both back. We knew that Gilliman was in stasis, having received a mortal wound.
Right.
We knew that Lionel Johnson was in stasis, having received a mortal wound, but nobody else knew where he was. Everybody knew where Gilliman was. Nobody knew where Lionel Johnson was.
Well, he was in the rock.
He was in the rock in a secret.
I gotta let PV out here. PV,
he was in a secret cavern with the Watchers in the dark, taking care of him, and nobody else knew he was on the rock, but everybody knew exactly where Rebude Gilliman was.
Right, exactly.
But we've got a whole bunch of people who disappeared into the warp, like Rogel Dorn disappeared that way.
Rogel Dorn disappeared fighting on a Chaos battle barge. That's where Rogel Dorn.
Yeah. Okay. And
Lehman Russ disappeared into the warp.
And I think Corvus Corax disappeared into
the warp. Corax disappeared into the warp. He was chasing after the Word Bearers, Lorgar. He was chasing after Lorgar, the Primarch of the Word Bearers. So he disappeared into the warp. Let's see. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Khan, same thing. Disappeared into the warp.
Yeah, Jagadi Khan.
Jagatai Khan. So that's 6. Ferrus Manus 7 is dead. Sanguinius 8 is dead. And then who's 9? What legion are we? What legion?
Salamanders.
Salamanders, right? And he's right. And so, and that is. I'm
drawing a blank, and he's my favorite guy.
Vulcan.
And
Vulcan's an eternal, perpetual.
Yeah,
he's a perpetual. They call their immortals perpetuals.
The salamanders are my favorite Space Marine Legion.
Yeah, because they're humanists.
Yeah, and so Glenn Cook wrote a book called The Dragon Never Sleeps, and in it there are these things called guard ships. And somebody once said something about guard ships that I think applies about legions too, and that is most of the legions. Somebody said something about guard ships defending Canon space, and the guy said, guard ships don't. The purpose of a guard ship is not to defend Canon space. The purpose of a guard ship is to punish Canon's enemies. And in a lot of ways, that's a good model for most of the Space Marine legions. Their purpose is not to defend the citizens of the Imperium. Their purpose is to defend the Imperium. And if all the humans on a planet end up dead, but the planet is okay so they can bring a new group of people in, most Space Marine legions would call that one a win.
Yeah.
And the salamanders wouldn't.
Yeah. No, that's true. And there's the book, I think it's Hell's Reach is the book where the Black Templars and the salamanders defend a city, and the salamanders are like, we're here to defend the people, and the I think Helbrecht is, and he's like, we're here to defend the city, and the salamanders are like, no, we're here to defend the people.
So it's interesting that you bring that one up, because that one it's available as an audiobook. It's also available as an animated movie on YouTube.
Really?
Yeah. Now it's interesting. The guy who did it, big chunks of it are directly ported from the audiobook.
Okay.
Directly ported. And it's interesting because as the guy's technique changes over time, as his animation skills improved. Early on, it's basically like a stop motion felt pen on paper look, but by the end, he's doing like regular animation. And I kind of wish that he had stuck with the original all the way through. Now, the thing is that it's like a 10-hour audiobook, and he turned it into a 2-hour movie.
Right. Yeah.
But it's
that's impressive.
It's really good. It's really good. And the novel is very accessible because it is narrated in the first person by the main character. And so it works really well.
Interesting.
Yeah, could be. Philip Banks says Richard Boyens used Half-Life 2 source, as I recall. Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me for later on. Early on, it's just like felt pen technique, that it looks like the beginning of the Aha Take on Me video.
That's funny. Oh, excuse me.
So it's fantastic.
Yeah, and if you haven't seen the new, there's that new animation on Amazon. What's it called? Secret something.
I haven't. A 40K thing or something else?
Yeah, there's a 40K thing. It's a series of animations, secret level. Thank you, Philip. It's a series of animations done about video games, and they did one about Space Marines with Titus and his crew, and it's amazing.
Okay, from the game, yeah. Okay,
yeah.
So I will admit, one of the things that I like doing on YouTube, and one of the things I'll actually try to watch as opposed to just listen to, is I love it when people go and pull all the cutscenes out of video games and turn them into movies.
Yes.
So like, I've never played anything in the Mass Effect franchise, but I've seen like 20 hours of Mass Effect cutscene stuff.
I have been summoned into chat. I just got done playing through Legendary Edition for the second time recently.
Okay.
It's a very good game. I highly suggest playing it. Even if you just like lower the difficulty to the lowest setting and just play on like story mode, essentially, it is a good story.
I need another hobby. Like I need a hole in the head.
Exactly.
So Philip Banks also says partly done by the same guy who did the Astartes project. Astartes was really good too, which was he was doing like little episodes of this. He was doing his own story with his own Space Marine chapter, and I hope he gets a chance to finish it at some point because the animation was really good. So, so that's.
But the only thing we don't talk about with Mass Effect is Andromeda. We don't talk about that. Not because the story is necessarily bad, but the UI is so horrible you don't want to play the game.
You know, it's a shame they never made a sequel to Highlander, isn't it?
Yeah, pretty much. It's like, oh, it's a shame they never continued playing in that sandbox of Mass Effect universe.
Never made a sequel to Highlander. That's a real shame. So
no,
Bob,
it's a really good series. Essentially, the TLDR of things is very much in the vein of Battlestar Galactica. Time is cyclical, and historical events kind of, play out time and time again. In Mass Effect's case, very much in the same vein as Battlestar Galactica, you've got organics versus inorganics. And that's a cycle that plays out over and over and over again. Now, at the very end of 3, you can choose a synthesis option that makes everyone both, which is what I go with. Also known as, conveniently, the green ending.
That would be interesting. I'd love to see.
But that one, you have to have all of your things, like all of your ducks in a row properly to even remotely get that. You have to have like over 6,000 troops or something like that, like forces wise, along with like you have to have a certain amount of like renegade as well as like light points.
Okay. I'd love to see a movie.
Yeah, no, that would be great. Supposedly we're supposed to be getting something made in it.
That would be fantastic. So
but we'll see what happens.
Homeworld's the other one that I've watched all the cutscenes.
All right.
Which is that?
Homeworld.
Okay. I like watching the Star Wars ones.
I haven't done any of the Star Wars.
I've been replaying SWTOR.
Yeah.
I just at some point I decided that Star Wars wasn't something that I was just going to put a whole lot of effort into. Which, when episode 7 came out, I totally agree with what my friend Brian Haven said. When I asked him if he liked it, he said, I was 12 again. And I totally and completely get that. I totally and completely get that. Because I hadn't realized how much I missed it. 7 is very derivative of 4 in a lot of ways. But it was exactly what I needed as the palate cleanser, right?
Yeah, and that's exactly it. It was like, look, we understand it's beat for beat, but they're trying to introduce you into a new franchise by an entirely different group of people. Yes, they're going to go beat for beat with the first movie to try and hook you. That's just how it goes, guys.
So it was good. But Homeworld I always find really interesting, and I need to go back and there's a Homeworld RPG out, a pen and paper RPG out, and which I own, but I haven't really spent as much time with it as I'm actually kind of surprised I haven't spent a whole bunch of time reading it yet. Homeworld started off as their proposal to do a Battlestar Galactica game, and they couldn't come to a deal with the studio. And so they said, all right, we'll do our own. So it ended up working out.
Well, guys, I am going to go because I got to walk Peely.
Yeah, we're at the 75-minute mark, so now's actually probably a pretty good time to go. I will say I will agree with Bob Orr. Bob pointed out that I actually started Games Workshop in 1988 because that's when I started graduate school, and that's when I.
Wow.
And to be honest, 40K was not my game, My hardcore game was Space Hulk. I did play some epic scale. I played some Adeptus Titanicus, so I played epic scale at both big stompy robots and little stuff. Played a lot of Advanced Space Crusade at one point, and a few of the other things. So, but the thing that I really was hardcore into is Space Hulk, which is still one of my 2 favorite games of all time.
Space Hulk was a great game.
Space Hulk was a better Aliens game than the Aliens game was.
Yeah, right.
Have you played the Aliens TTRPG yet?
No. This was the Aliens game that came out from Leading Edge Games in 1980 something.
Oh,
There was a role-playing game and there was a board game. The role-playing game had some interesting stuff as sort of a background thing. The board game was,
The current role-play game is based off the same system that Tales from the Loop is, and The Walking Dead. It's by Free League, so you've got stress die and things like that.
At some point, I decided that Aliens, I liked some of the ambiance and I liked the technology, but I didn't like the background because it's too dark too much of the time. And I especially don't like what they did with the movie, because every time they couldn't get an actor to come back for the next movie, they decided they had to kill them off horribly in between the movies. And so I got really sick of like, why should I care about this person? They're just going to kill them off screen before the next movie.
Really?
Yep. No, I mean, that happens a lot, unfortunately.
Like,
tons of fucking money.
I watched Prometheus on cable. I bought Prometheus, but I bought it because the ship, the Prometheus, is seriously cool. And I like the lighting and the effects and some of the other stuff. The movie itself is, although Prometheus is interesting in that there's this, anybody who's seen the movie knows exactly what I'm talking about. There's one part of that movie where you go, oh yeah, I'm watching a horror movie. I had totally forgotten that. This is a horror movie.
You mean the scene where they come across the little cobra thing for the first time, I think?
Yes. That is the scene where it's like, oh shit, this is...
this is technically a horror! Fuck!
I had totally forgotten that this was a horror movie. So,
all right, guys.
All right, let's go ahead and call it. So thank you very much, Alec, for being on the show. No show next week. I will be at a science fiction convention next week with Tom Pope. But the week after that, the plan is for me to do the first of 2 shows. I think it's going to be 2 on Albedo, and I'll talk about all the background and stuff like that. And then I'll end up talking about ship design and modular ships and how combat works and all that other stuff. So, Lissa, you look like you were going to say something.
I was going to say, I will not be present on the 25th, just as a heads up. I've got a D&D raid thing that we're probably going to have to do on that day. All unfortunately.
Right. That sounds good. So thank you very much, everybody. And once again, as always, I am honored that you choose to spend your Saturday night listening to me and whoever else is on the show talk. That's really cool.
Also, eating raw rice,
thank you very much.
would expand in your stomach. So if you
talk to you later, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
You would probably